Welcome, everyone. My name is Buddy Dearman, and I have the honor and privilege of leading the national dealerships practice at Forvis Mazars. We are glad that you've joined us today. This past October, I ran into Andy Koblenz at the Louisiana Auto Dealer Association event, where he had just presented the findings of the study that he will share with you all in a few minutes to LADA's board of directors. And then at NADA in New Orleans, we ran into Andy again on the convention floor after he had just presented on this very topic in a conference session from the live stage. During our conversation, Andy graciously offered to do an encore presentation for our team members, clients, prospects, and friends. And so we are delighted to have Andy join us today to present to you the findings of this NADA Commission study around the cost associated with the different channels of retail automobile distribution. Andy, many thanks for joining us, and it is all yours, my friend.
Okay, thanks, buddy. I really appreciate it, and thanks for over the years, all the collaborative efforts we've done with Forvis. We really appreciate the relationship that we have with you, and today's opportunity is just the latest in that long-standing relationship. So, as Betty mentioned, the cost of distribution in automotive retailing has been a big subject, both within the industry and outside of it, over the past several years. Questions like the following have been raised. How much does vehicle distribution cost? How much does vehicle distribution actually cost? Who creates these costs? And how can we best drive efficiency? And sadly, much of this discussion has maligned dealers. Let me give you an example. Here's the Houston Chronicle. Auto dealerships are America's most powerful middleman. And they're not the only ones who've said this. Another newspaper. Economists and other critics say that dealerships add an unnecessary middleman and layers of markup and fees. It can range from a few $100s to $20,000 or more over the MSRP from the manufacturer. Sadly, even some OEMs have agreed, and these OEMs, some of them have even gone ahead and tried to quantify it. Here's one quotation. I'm not going to mention which OEM it is. Our current distribution model costs an estimated $2,000 more per vehicle versus Tesla's integrated approach. For traditional automakers, keeping up has been a challenge. And note the word integrated there. That's referring to direct sales, or what economists refer to as vertical integration of the distribution channel. But this conclusion, reached by those other commentators and this OEM, were not based on data or analysis. So we undertook to study the issue more formally and more structurally. We decided to have the work done by a recognized expert consultancy. With the assistance of Glenn Mercer, with whom I'm sure you're very familiar, who served as our project manager, we issued an RFP, received several bids, interviewed the finalists, and awarded the contract. And we picked the highly regarded firm of Oliver Wyman, an internationally recognized expert in automotive matters. And then we gave Oliver Wyman something that nobody else had. We gave them 31 million data points of dealer data. And based upon that data, they normalized it, and then they produced the study that is seen here. What I'd like to do for the balance of the presentation is to give you a top-line overview of what Oliver Wyman found, how they found it, and what it tells us for the conversations with OEMs and for the industry going forward. So let's start with their methodology. Oliver Wyman started by building 3 channel archetypes. Those 3 channel archetypes are franchise dealers, hybrid, or what you might refer to as American agency, and a direct-to-consumer. But this is not just Tesla. This is a more structured direct-to-consumer that applies to all potential direct sellers. So how did Oliver Wyman do this? They did it by determining what roles had to be performed in distributing vehicles, who performs those roles, and what that performance costs. And this chart, which was the result of those efforts, is key to the study. It lays out for all 3 of the channels both what the distribution functions are and who performs them. Now, the first thing that this chart reveals is that dealers are not middlemen in any way, shape, sense of the word. Note that there's no box on this slide that says, quote, this function need not be performed in this channel. The real question is, which channel does it better? And that's what Oliver Wyman did when it applied this methodology to the data that they had from us and from their own work with OEMs. And based upon that analysis of data against this methodology, they came to one main finding. This is literally quoted from their report. The franchise dealer channel has a lower net cost of distribution than either direct or hybrid channels when operating at mass market scale in the United States. That's the headline of the study. So how did they reach this conclusion? What are the keys to accurately comparing our three channels? There are two of them. First, you must avoid conflating distribution costs that are not channel dependent with those that are channel dependent. In other words, you need to remove the impact of non-channel specific factors. And when these non-channel specific costs are removed, or more accurately, held constant, dealers cost about the same per car as the direct sales channel. The second key is, to accurately comparing the channels is that you must not ignore the value that the various channels deliver. Now, all three of the channels deliver value, but the value is different channel to channel. And to correctly compare the channels, you need to factor that value in. So the second key is to include the overall value that the channel delivers. And what happens when you do that correctly? When these values are factored in, the total net distribution cost per car in the dealer channel proves to be lower than for the direct sales. Okay, so let's go deeper on these 2 points. What are the non-channel costs that should be held constant? And what is the value that needs to be factored in? All right, let's take those non-channel costs first. Upstream strategies are typically driven by OEMs and are often positioned as channel efficiencies, but are not inherent to any one distribution channel. Now, we call them upstream strategies because the OEM makes the decision whether to incur them upstream from the actual distribution of the vehicle. So let me give you some examples, and I think it'll become clear what we're talking about. Product line complexity. Does the manufacturer offer few or many vehicles? Do you have 3 models or do you have 15 models? That's a decision that has nothing to do with which channel you choose, but it is a decision that will drive up your cost of distribution if you opt for many vehicles. It's easier to sell 3 models than 15 models. Second, product option complexity. This is how many options you offer, how many trim lines do you offer. Again, it's a decision that you make unrelated to your distribution channel, but it will drive up your cost. It's harder to sell a product that has 10 or 15 trim line variations than one that has 1 or 2. Third, and this is one that gets confused all the time, inventory. Do you carry a lot of inventory or not very much? Typically, that's the result of the balance between supply and demand. When supply exceeds demand, you're going to end up carrying more inventory. Is it a push system or a pull system? But again, it is a decision that an OEM makes whether to have a lot of inventory or not. But it is not, it's a distribution, it drives a distribution cost, but it is not channel specific. Fourth, facility characteristics. Do you need a big store with a big blue box like the Chevrolet facility requirements require, or the curvy line that Honda has, or do you have a more basic store? Again, something that's going to drive distribution costs, but has nothing to do with whether or not it's an independent franchise dealer who's operating that store or a direct seller. And finally, product advertising, tier 1 product advertising. Whether or not you buy an ad at the Super Bowl is a cost of distributing your vehicle, but it doesn't depend. You don't buy ads if you have dealers and not buy ads if you don't have dealers. It's an upstream decision that the OEMs make. So these are all the types of distribution costs that Oliver Wyman said are real, and they're in there, but they are not channel efficiencies. They're not dependent on the channel that you choose and need to be held constant in the analysis. Okay, so we've talked about the upstream strategies that affect the cost side. What about those value items? Each channel adds value to the distribution process through distinct characteristics of its operations. So what are some of these value points? The first one is the ability to do customized deals. Dealers can, quote, get the car sold better than direct sellers. Oliver Wyman estimated approximately a 2 to 3% lift in incremental sales using the dealer system, although the dealers who they consulted on the project said that number was probably more like 4 or 5%. But Oliver Wyman wanted to be conservative in valuing this value point and held it at 2 to 3%. But that is clearly something that the dealer independent franchise dealer system provides a value that is not present in the direct sales. Upselling other goods and services. Again, does the channel affect the ability and motivation to sell more goods and services? Well, customer loyalty. This is one where all three channels delivered about the same value, but nonetheless, it is a value that needs to be assessed, not just when you're trying to do a net cost analysis. Fourth, intra-brand competition. Does the channel provide an incentive to do intra-brand competition or not? Now, this is a value that largely is provided by the direct sales model. You'll never see an ad that says buy from the Walmart north of town rather than the Walmart south of town, but you certainly will see ads telling you to buy from the Ford dealer north of town rather than the Ford dealer south of town because they're owned by different people. So this is a value, the avoidance of intra-brand competition, not necessarily so great for the consumer, but in terms of the enterprise, it's a value that is provided for by the direct sales model, not provided for by the dealer model. So as I said, all of the channels provide different values, and we wanted to consider all of them. And then finally, price optimization. For the deals that get done, who's optimizing the price? So those are the value points that Oliver Wyman considered to ultimately reach its net distribution cost conclusions. So let's look at those numbers. First, let's start with the average gross channel cost. This is just the cost side of the ledger. When properly compared, that is, when holding the cost of upstream strategies constant across all channels, the three channels all involve approximately the same level of cost. The delta from direct sales to franchise dealers is only about $360 a car. And though that $360 difference is attributable largely to three items. The first is personnel cost, although this is very important. As dealerships get larger, this goes away and it approaches zero when you get as large as Lithia or AutoNation. There are just cost efficiencies in the personnel area that are present. But we were using data that was actual market data drawn from our members, and our members on average aren't as large as Lithia or AutoNation. So that's a slight cost advantage to the direct sales model. The second one is floor plan assistance, not floor plan. Floor plan is inventory, and an inventory carrying cost is got to be held constant across the channel. But floor plan assistance exists exclusively in the indirect model, and that operates as a slight cost advantage to the direct sales model. And then finally, I mentioned intra-brand advertising. One of the values that I said that the direct sales model delivers is the absence of intra-brand competition. There's also a cost advantage there because they're not buying those ads. They're not spending money on those intra-brand local advertisements if you're in a direct sales model. Those are the three primary contributors to this relatively small delta on just the cost side. But cost alone, as we said, isn't the proper analysis, because if you don't measure the value, you will not necessarily get to the ultimate and correct complete answer. So let's look at the numbers when we feather in the value side. Franchise dealers come out as the best option. Now, value is expressed as a range here, because calculating value is a little bit more amorphous than the hard numbers that we were able to calculate on the cost side, but it has to be calculated in. Glenn Mercer would joke at some of our meetings by saying, painting the car is a cost that you can save, but you're not going to sell very many cars if you sell them with only the primer on and don't have the nice colors. So there is a value that painting the car brings to the distribution as well as a cost. So when you calculate in the value and the cost of distribution to get to a net number, you see that on balance, the franchise dealer system actually produces a more cost-efficient way of delivering the cars. So many have raised the question, and as I said, I put those quotations up at the beginning of where people were saying that there was a dramatic cost differential between direct sellers and the franchise dealer system. It is, by the way, possibly true that a direct seller who has demand exceeding supply and doesn't therefore need to carry inventory and decides not to advertise tier one advertising may actually have distribution costs that are lower, but it has nothing to do with their choice of channel and going direct. So when you properly compare apples to apples, the cost of distribution for a indirect traditional franchise dealer model and a direct consumer model, you see that on a net basis, the franchise dealer model is slightly more cost effective. This is completely consistent with the principles that NADA, the franchise principles that NADA has been promoting. We've shared this with the OEMs, and they have not. They've asked a lot of questions, but have not pushed back on our ultimate conclusion. And we think that this is valuable for the public policy debates that go on in some state houses to say that where a lot of people say that dealers are middlemen that need to be eliminated to achieve greater efficiency in the distribution, that's simply not the case. And the conversation should proceed on other matters where there is more variability, like customer experience and optimizing those. So this is what's been driving our conversations with manufacturers since the report came out. The report is available. As I put up a picture here, it is physically. It's available on the Oliver Wyman website. As Buddy said, we commissioned this study. We didn't tell them what the answer should be. It's on their website. Oh, my lights just went off. And they are, if you go onto the Oliver Wyman website and put in the search function, automotive cost distribution, you'll come to their blog and the actual text of the report. So with that, Buddy, I'll turn it back to you, and I'm happy to take any questions that might have come up.
Okay. Andy, I'm curious about the report itself. How long did it take Oliver Wyman to conduct the study and go through their iterations of drafts and get to the final deal?
So once we awarded the project, it took about 12 months. The first several months, we're taking the data that we had from our 20 groups and normalizing it, because the Nissan data and the Toyota data would come in, the way their financial statements are structured, and they needed to normalize it so they could compare apples to apples across the industry. And then secondly, the other part of their process that took them a little while, after they normalized the data, then they were able to really go in, and they used sort of a build it up from the bottom approach. They call it a delta-based analysis approach. They also needed to feather in the OEM data and build that model of direct sales. And they drew on publicly available data from OEM 10Ks. They drew on information that they had from their experience working with other clients. And they also conducted about 30 interviews with OEM, either current or past OEM personnel and employees to validate the OEM and direct sales side of that analysis. So it took them that took another. First, the normalization took about 4 or 5 months. That took them another 4 or 5 months, and then a couple months to actually write up the report. So it was about a year from when we did it. And this, by the way, I should have said this at the beginning. The data is from 2012 forward. We did pull out the COVID data because we didn't want to because we thought it might skew it because the COVID situation, supply and demand were upside down. Although when we went back and looked at the COVID data, it really didn't radically change it. But this is based upon non-COVID data, so that we think it's more reliable.
I got you. You touched on it for a minute, but since publishing the results of the study, what kind of feedback have you received from the OEMs?
Yeah,
maybe especially the one who said that it's $2,000 or more.
Yeah, so I won't tell you who that was, but we did present. We presented this to all the OEMs, so we did include that OEM in it, and they found it. They were very interested to begin with. They dedicated a lot of time. For at least 3 or 4 of them, we had follow-up conversations where they sent some more questions in to drill deeper. They were looking to drill down on their own experiences with their dealers. And by the way, our data, since we have markers for which dealership is, our data is very searchable. You can look rural versus urban. You can look regionally. You can look brand specific. If I had to characterize their general reaction was that they agreed with the cost data. I'll give you one example. One question we got: what about dealer profitability? Dealer profitability is a cost in an indirect model, in a franchise dealer model, but not a cost in a direct sales model. And our response to that was no. That is the dealers have invested $250 million, if not more, of capital in their operations. That capital demands a return. If you were going to replicate and have a direct sales channel, and again, if you want to have big stores, you have to have a big store in your direct sales model as well. So you would have to replicate that capital investment, and you would demand a return on investment from that. Your stockholders would demand a return on investment from that capital investment. So that dealer profitability was really properly viewed as a return on investment. And when done so, it's one of the ones that is held constant. And when we explained that to the manufacturer, they shook their heads and said, "You're right. That is the correct analysis, and it is at a separate cost." One thing that the Oliver Wyman study does do is that they did a little sidebar on, so how much would it cost for the OEMs to go direct, the legacy OEMs to go direct? And they calculated that number out on a rough basis to be about $250 million of capital investment. So the nature of the study is to say, look, you got a pretty efficient system here. Plus, you would have to, if you wanted to switch, you would have to reach into your pocket and pull out $250 million collectively as an industry. So this study is designed to be read by both people who are native and are starting up, potentially a direct seller, as well as those who are already in the business and might shift.
I guess said the Tesla model is such an anomaly that it is not statistically valid when you consider mass market like we are with Ford, Toyota, Honda, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's so many. There's only 3 models, and there's
correct.
Their whole.
Yeah, if I go back to this chart, let me go back if I can, all the way to this one. Oops, went too far. This one right here. If you look at that, you look at those 5 items, and now let's overlay Tesla. Product line complexity. Well, sure. Let's compare Tesla with Honda. Tesla has a lot fewer models than Honda does. Tesla has many fewer trim level variations than Honda has. Tesla generally doesn't carry an inventory because demand exceeds supply. Tesla doesn't have the facility requirements that Honda has. And last I've seen, I like to ask people, have you seen the latest Tesla ad? There isn't any. They've opted not to advertise. So on all those channels, sure, Tesla is spending less money distributing their vehicles than Honda is. None of those have to do with the fact that Honda has dealers. It's because of where Honda's brand is in the marketplace. And
Yeah.
that's why Tesla is not the conflation ultimately that is at the bottom of the converse of what this study shows is that Tesla has a distribution cost advantage over Honda. And the answer is it might, but it's not attributable to the absence of dealers. That's why when I put that quotation up back here, one more, sorry. The word integrated is so important in that sentence. It's not Tesla's integrated approach. It's that the current distribution model costs an estimated $2,000 more per vehicle versus Tesla. That may be true, but it's not because of Tesla's vertical integration of its distribution channel. It's because of other attributes of the market. That is the ultimate finding. Don't conflate Tesla's experience with direct sales. It's not the direct sales that Tesla is using that's driving its advantages. It's other decisions that they've made.
Another question. We got time for one or two more here. How could the state associations either have they been supportive or could they be supportive in helping tell the story here?
Yeah, this is the state associations do a great job of telling the dealer story in the legislatures and with the media. They're closer to the ground than NADA is, and we think that this study is going to be exceedingly valuable, not only in our conversations with OEMs, but also with state associations as they talk to the media and to the legislators and the regulators in the states who still operate under this false understanding that somehow if you want to sell EVs, for example, you need to get the dealers out of the way because the direct sellers can do a better job. That simply isn't the case. In fact, I would argue that this document is going to say if you really want to increase your sales of EVs, by tinkering with your distribution model, your distribution channel of choice should be the dealer model, because that is the way. You might have remember a couple of years ago, NADA was saying dealers were all in on EVs. There was a second half of that dealers were essential to driving EV sales. Even in the absence of dramatic consumer demand, the best way to increase EV sales, if that's your objective, as it is with many state legislatures, would be to embrace the dealer model and not to reject it.
Yeah. Well, I see we're at the bottom of the hour. I know that this was scheduled for 30 minutes. I'm going to give you one more. If people drop, then that's okay. But one more before we wrap up.
Sure.
What has been the most surprising development that you can connect with the results of the study?
I guess the most surprising thing is that when we actually got to the guys within the gentlemen and ladies within the OEM organizations who were thinking about this, they were not operating under the misperception. They when you got down into the bowels of those organizations with the people who were crunching numbers, they were saying this was confirmatory, and they were actually quite interested in drilling into the data to see how they could optimize their operations as opposed to making a change. So that was heartening, and we tried to reinforce that at every turn. And we think this study has gone a long way to try to take the issue that is embedded in this quotation that's up there on the screen off the table and get us talking about how to optimize the system with the OEMs. That was the most surprising and heartening aspect of this exercise.
Well, Andy, we really appreciate your time today, and so glad that I bumped into you at the LADA golf tournament and then walking the floor at NADA, and then we were able to put this together. I think we sealed the deal over a po' boy at Mother's on Sunday.
We're thrilled you made it through the snow to get there. So I hope a lot of folks were able to. But if they weren't, this is one of the presentations that we did there. So now you have a chance to see it here.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I would encourage folks to, like Andy said, go to Oliver Wyman's website and go check out the report for yourself. The recording of the webinar will be up on our website in a few days, and you'll be able to, if you want to go back and listen to something again. We just really appreciate the relationship with NADA, and we thank you, Andy, for taking some time to present this really important information to our group. So with that,
thank you
we
for the
will
opportunity to do so.
Absolutely. We wish everybody a great rest of your Thursday, and thanks for being a part of the webinar today. Thank you.
Take care.